HOA poisoned my mom's water. They thought no one would find out. But I did. And I made sure they'd never touch another drop again. Ever. They took her kindness for weakness. They fined her, harassed her. And when she got sick, I connected the dots. So I bought every single water right this town depended on. And when the HOA came crawling back, I cut it off. Before I tell you how I did it, let me tell you how this war began. Hey everyone, welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Mark, born and raised in a small town outside Austin, Texas. I fix fences, raise cattle, and fight corrupt HOAs for sport. If you've ever been bullied by one of those boardroom tyrants in your neighborhood, then hit subscribe and type "Boo HOA" in the comments. Because this one's for my mom. And don't forget to share this story with a friend who hates HOAs as much as we do. It started with a smell. Not the kind that fades when you open a window. It was thick, sour, almost metallic, coming from the kitchen sink. Mom was washing vegetables that morning, and she frowned. Said it smelled funny. I thought maybe the pipes were rusty again. Our house was old, older than the HOA itself. The land had been ours for generations, long before anyone cared about lawn heights or mailbox colors. But lately, the HOA had been watching us closer than ever. They didn't like that Mom still kept chickens. Didn't like the old red barn. Didn't like me parking my truck on the gravel instead of the driveway. Petty stuff. But they fined her anyway. And Mom, she was the type who paid quietly. Never wanted trouble. But trouble came anyway. That smell didn't go away. And after a few days, Mom started getting dizzy. Her skin looked pale. She said the tap water made her stomach twist. I bought bottled water from the gas station for a week. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I filled a glass from the faucet, took one sniff, and nearly gagged. It was like rotten eggs and bleach mixed together. I poured it out immediately, and that's when I saw something strange. A faint white residue clinging to the sink basin. I grabbed a flashlight, leaned closer. It looked like powder, dissolved into the metal. Something was wrong. I collected a sample in a mason jar and drove straight to my buddy Eric's workshop. He runs a local water treatment company. We poured a few drops into a test strip and waited. When the color turned bright orange, Eric's face went pale. "Dude, this isn't rust. This is chemical contamination." He ran a full test, and the results came back showing traces of chlorine and agricultural pesticide, the kind used for large-scale weed control. We don't spray anything like that near our property. But the HOA had recently hired a lawn maintenance contractor to treat common areas, including the ditch that runs right behind Mom's fence line. My blood boiled. I went home, printed the water test report, and marched straight to the HOA president's house the next morning. Mrs. Franklin, 60 years old, hair stiff as her personality. She opened the door with that fake Suburban smile. I handed her the papers. Told her they'd better call off their contractors before I did something about it. She barely looked at the report. Just said, "Mr. Walker, if your water's dirty, that's not our problem. You maintain your property, not us." Then she shut the door in my face. I stood there, gripping those papers so tight my knuckles turned white. That night, Mom started vomiting. I rushed her to the hospital. The doctor said it looked like mild chemical poisoning. She'd recover, but only if she stayed away from that water. I sat in that hospital hallway staring at the vending machine's reflection. And something in me changed. I wasn't just a son anymore. I was a man with a mission. Over the next week, I pulled county records, property deeds, and public utility maps. And that's when I found something unbelievable. The HOA didn't own the water rights for the land they built on. The original ownership still belonged to a local agricultural trust, one that was accepting offers for sale. I called my lawyer friend Jake. Asked him what it would take to buy them out. He said, "Mark, you serious?" I said, "Dead serious." We spent 3 weeks pushing paperwork through. Every cent of my savings, every loan I could pull, went into that deal. And one afternoon, while Mom was still resting at the hospital. I got the email confirming it. I was now the legal owner of the HOA's water rights. Every drop that flowed through their sprinklers, their pools, their fancy fountains. All of it was mine now. I didn't tell them right away. I wanted them to feel comfortable, confident. So when the HOA board sent another letter fining Mom for unauthorized property modifications, her chicken coop, again, I smiled. I waited one more day. Then, at 7 a.m. sharp, I made one phone call to the county's utility manager. By noon, the HOA's entire neighborhood water supply was cut off. Every tap, every hose, every sprinkler system dry. By evening, my phone exploded with calls. Board members, neighbors, angry voicemails. Mrs. Franklin herself came storming down our driveway, hair messy, shouting words I can't repeat. And I just leaned against my truck, sipping a bottle of clean water. Told her, maybe now you'll understand what it feels like when someone poisons yours. Her face turned red. She screamed something about lawsuits. But I just smiled and said, good luck washing your court papers without water. That night, for the first time in weeks, Mom slept peacefully. The sound of silence, no sprinklers, no HOA patrols, was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. But something in my gut told me, they weren't done yet. What would you have done if someone poisoned your mom's water, forgiven them, or drained them dry like I did? Tell me in the comments, backhand index pointing down. The next morning, you could hear the chaos all the way from our porch. Sprinklers sputtering dry, car washes closed, and those fancy fountains by the HOA clubhouse? Stone dry. I poured my coffee slow, sat back in my rocking chair, and listened to the sweet sound of karma. Phones ringing, dogs barking, angry voices echoing across the cul-de-sac. I could almost smell the panic. By noon, a black SUV rolled up my driveway. Out stepped two HOA board members, Mr. Lewis, the vice president, and some guy I'd never seen before in a gray suit with slicked hair. He looked more like a lawyer than a neighbor. Lewis didn't even say hello. Just marched up and yelled, "What the hell did you do, Mark?" I smiled, sipping my coffee. "Turned off my own water," I said. "Guess the neighborhood's connected, huh?" The lawyer dude pulled out a stack of papers. "Mr. Walker, the HOA board demands you restore immediate service or face civil penalties." I looked at the papers. Didn't even touch them. "You're standing on private property," I said calmly. "Take those papers and walk right back down my drive before I wash my truck with what little water I got left." He blinked. Didn't know if I was serious or just crazy enough to be. Then I leaned forward and said, "You people poisoned my mom. You poisoned our land. So maybe it's time you learned what drought feels like." They left. But I knew they'd be back. By afternoon, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. I could see it from screenshots my friend sent me. People panicking about dishes, showers, pool water turning green. Some blamed the county. Some blamed the HOA. A few smart ones started whispering my name. That night, while Mom rested in her recliner, I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. But peace doesn't last long when you're fighting the HOA. Around 9 p.m., I saw headlights creeping slow down the road, then stopping right at our fence line. Two figures stepped out, flashlights in hand. One of them aimed his beam right toward our barn. I slipped on my boots and walked out quietly. Didn't say a word until I was 10 feet away. Then I hit them with my own flashlight and said, "Lose something, boys?" They froze. Turned out to be HOA security, or whatever they called themselves. One of them stuttered, "Just checking if the water main valve is on your property." "Yeah," I said. "And checking private property without permission's a felony. You want to keep your flashlight or your job." They didn't answer, just left. Fast. When I got back inside, Mom looked up from her chair. Her voice weak but firm. "Mark, don't get yourself in trouble over me." I knelt beside her. "Mom, they could have killed you. Trouble already started. I'm just finishing it." She sighed. Your father would have been proud, but he'd tell you not to lose yourself in it. I smiled softly. Maybe she was right. But it was too late for backing down now. 2 days later, the local news showed up. A reporter from Channel 9 stood outside the HOA gates doing a segment about mysterious water shortages in the suburban community of Green Hollow Estates. I laughed so hard I almost spit my coffee. She said words like panic, emergency, and residents demanding answers. Not one mention of the HOA poisoning anyone's well. Not yet anyway. But here's the funny part. The same HOA board that ignored my mom's medical reports was now begging the county for emergency tanker deliveries. And guess whose land those tankers had to cross to reach their pipes? Mine. I called the trucking company. Said they could pass if they paid a private access fee. They hesitated, then agreed. For the next 3 days, I watched their tankers roll through my gate. Each one paying me for passage. Each one refilling the very pipes I could shut off any second. I made back half my investment in less than a week. Revenge and profit. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to fix his fence in peace. But just when I thought things were cooling down, Mrs. Franklin returned. She pulled up in her shiny Lexus, slammed the door, and stomped toward me in heels too high for gravel. Mr. Walker, you're playing with fire, she snapped. This entire neighborhood will take you to court if you don't restore water immediately. I leaned against my truck. You mean the same neighborhood that let my mom drink poison? The same one that fined her for feeding chickens? Yeah, go ahead and sue me. I'll make sure every courtroom knows why you're thirsty. She glared. Her face twisted like she'd bitten into a lemon. Then she said something that made my jaw clench. You think you're a hero? You're nothing but a redneck with a grudge. I took one step closer. Lowered my voice. You're right about one thing, I said. I do have a grudge. And I'm not done yet. She backed up slowly, got in her car, and peeled off, kicking dust into the air. That night, things escalated. Around midnight, Mom woke me up. She'd heard something outside. I grabbed my flashlight again, stepped onto the porch. And there it was. Someone had slashed my truck tires and spray-painted "terrorist" on the side of my barn. I stood there, heart pounding, rage boiling inside me. They wanted war. They'd get one. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and started making a list. Names of every HOA board member. Addresses. Phone numbers. All public info. I didn't need to break the law to make a point. Then I started calling reporters. Sent them the lab reports from Mom's water sample. The emails I'd gotten from the HOA after complaining. And pictures of her hospital wristband. Within 24 hours, the story broke. Local HOA accused of chemical negligence after resident falls ill. The HOA tried to deny everything. Said I forged the reports. But once the county inspectors got involved, they couldn't lie anymore. Turns out that contractor they hired had been dumping chemical runoff right near the water ditch. And the HOA board approved the work without any environmental checks. They were finished. Done. But me. I wasn't satisfied yet. See, payback wasn't about money anymore. It was about balance. They took something clean and pure, water, and turned it into poison. So I took what was theirs, and made it mine. And watching them scramble under pressure made me realize one thing. Power feels different when you earn it the hard way. That night, Mom called me over. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in her favorite quilt. Her voice was softer this time. Mark, maybe now you can let it go, she said. They're already paying for it. I nodded. But deep down, I knew this fight wasn't over. Because once an HOA gets desperate, they stop playing by their own rules. If you were in my shoes, and the HOA tried to threaten you after hurting your family, would you stop here or push even harder? Thought balloon backhand index pointing down. They came with badges and paperwork the week after the news broke. Blue lights flashing down our gravel road. Not from ambulances this time, but from a county sheriff and 2 deputies. I watched them pull up like they were delivering bad news, because they were. I opened the door slow. Mom sat in her chair, clutching the quilt. Her eyes were tired, but proud. "You okay, boy?" she asked quietly. I kissed her forehead and stepped outside. Sheriff Ramirez stood there, hat in hand, polite but firm. "Mr. Walker, we've had complaints," he said. "Neighbors claim you interfered with the public water supply." I held my hands where he could see them. "Sheriff, I own the water rights," I said. "I did what I had to do to protect my mom." He looked at his deputy, then back at me. "This is a civil issue, mostly. But when public services are affected, we have to investigate." I nodded. I expected that line. What I didn't expect was the next part. One of the deputies handed me a stack of court papers, a temporary restraining order, and an injunction filed by the HOA. They wanted immediate restoration of service and an order preventing me from restricting access to the water main. I read the papers like they were a bad joke. The HOA lawyers wrote with all the calm cruelty of people who've never had to throw out moldy bread for lack of running water. "You'll appear in county court next Tuesday," the sheriff said. "And until then, don't touch the valves or block access." I folded the papers slowly, gave them back. "Sheriff, my mother is poisoned. You saw the hospital records. If she drinks from that water, she could get hurt again." He hesitated. "Mr. Walker, our job isn't to take sides." I stared at him for a long beat. "Then do your job," I said. "Find out who's responsible for poisoning my mom." They left with the same polite stiffness they'd arrived with. And my stomach dropped. Court was a week away. 7 days to plan. 7 days to watch your enemy line up lawyers like chess pieces. I spent that week collecting everything I could. Medical reports, lab results, truck routes for the contractors, invoices, and every single email the HOA sent about the treatment of common areas. Jake, my lawyer friend, came over and we mapped out our defense line like two generals planning a siege. He leaned on the table, looking at the files. "You did right, Mark," he said quietly. "But you also opened the door for them to try and punish you. The judge might order service restored regardless of the facts. We need witnesses. We need proof." So we went door to door. Some neighbors slammed their doors in our faces. Some whispered apologies and handed us backyard security footage showing the contractors' trucks dumping chemicals near the ditch. A woman named Sandra, who lived 2 houses down and always kept a perfect garden, stepped forward with a shaky voice. She'd called the county months ago about odd dead patches of grass near the ditch. No one had listened. Her testimony was gold. When Tuesday came, the courthouse smelled like coffee and old wood. The judge looked younger than I expected, not the kind of man who'd be swayed by yard signs or glossy brochures. The HOA's lawyer was smooth. He asked the sheriff to enforce the injunction. Said the community had been deprived of municipal services. Painted me as a vigilante with a grudge. When my turn came, Jake stood up and spoke calm and steady. He laid out the lab tests, the contractor invoices, the emails showing the HOA approved the chemical treatments without environmental checks. He put Sandra on the stand. She told the judge about her dead grass and the smell she'd noticed for months. She said she'd watched trucks come in at night, dump, and leave. The judge listened. He pushed his glasses up his nose and asked the HOA lawyer one question that changed the whole room. "Did the HOA commission an environmental assessment before hiring this contractor?" he asked. The room went quiet. The HOA lawyer stumbled, said something about industry standard practices and limited funds. Limited funds. For a board that spent thousands on landscaping and a marble fountain in the clubhouse. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered a temporary restoration of service, but only under strict county supervision and testing. And he ordered an immediate environmental inspection of the ditch and common areas. It was not a win. But it was not a total loss either. I drove home with a knot in my chest, papers in hand. But as I pulled into my driveway, I heard a different sound from the usual silence. A woman screaming, and then the sound of glass shattering. I ran toward Mrs. Franklin's house. Her window had been smashed. Someone had thrown a rock through it and taped a bag over it with a note that read, "Stop poisoners." Her neighbors stood around in shock. I felt a twinge of pity for her then. Not for what she did, but because once you climb to the top of a rotten tree, the fall is lonelier than the climb. That night, someone anonymous left a bouquet of wildflowers on my porch. No note. Just flowers. The next morning, county inspectors arrived with lab coats and clipboard in hand. They took soil samples from the ditch and tested water from the HOA lines. Their faces grew darker as the hours passed. By afternoon, the findings were clear. Elevated levels of pesticide runoff, traces of industrial-grade chlorine, and additives you don't just find in municipal water. The county issued a press release. Suddenly, the HOA headline changed from "Mysterious Shortage" to "Possible Negligence." Channel 9 came back with cameras and a truck full of microphones. Mrs. Franklin gave a statement that sounded like a practiced apology. "We're deeply saddened," she said. But the words didn't land right. Over the next few days, more neighbors started calling me. Some apologetic. Some still angry. Some admitting they knew things and were too afraid to speak up. Power does strange things to people. It makes them cruel, and then it makes them scared. One night, while I sat up late at the kitchen table, Mom shuffled in with her cup of tea. She sat across from me and took my hand. "You did all this for me," she said softly. Tears shone in her eyes. "I don't want you to go to prison over me." I squeezed her hand. "Mom, I won't lose myself. I promised your father I would protect this land. He taught me to stand for what's right." She smiled weakly. "And he always said, 'Revenge tastes better with pie,'" she whispered. I laughed then. A small, honest sound that chased away some of the darkness. But even as I smiled, I knew the fight was getting uglier. Court battles, angry neighbors, vandalism. It was all piling up. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I feared the day they try to make this personal in ways more dangerous than slashed tires and notes on my barn. Because when a group of people with money feel cornered, they stop playing by the rules. If you had the evidence I had, would you risk everything and press charges, or try to settle quietly to keep the peace? What would you choose, justice or quiet? Tell me below, backhand index pointing down. The week after the inspection felt like calm before a storm. The county had sealed off the ditch with yellow tape, testing every pipe and valve. The HOA office stayed dark most days, blinds drawn, door locked. But I knew they were meeting somewhere, whispering about me. Mom was feeling better. The water tests proved our well was clean, and she'd started smiling again. But I couldn't relax. Too many strange cars had been slowing down by our property at night. Too many headlights stopping just long enough to make me step outside with a flashlight in my hand. Then, Thursday night happened. It was around 11 p.m. The sound came first, a low hum, like tires crunching gravel near the back ditch. I went out through the mudroom door, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other. The wind smelled sharp, chemical again. I crept closer and saw two figures near the barrier tape. They were pouring something, dark liquid from a container, into the ditch water. The yellow tape fluttered under their flashlights. Then, one of them struck a lighter. "Hey!" I yelled. They froze, then dropped the can and ran toward a black pickup waiting nearby. I barely got a glimpse, a man in a hoodie, a woman behind the wheel. Tires screeched. The truck fishtailed down the road and disappeared into the dark. Then came the flash. A burst of orange light ripped through the ditch, flames shooting up 6, maybe 8 feet high. The smell of burning plastic and fuel filled the air. I stumbled back, coughing, heart hammering. The fire spread fast, too fast. I called 911, shouting the address, telling them what I saw. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the ditch was a line of glowing embers and smoke that rolled over our yards like fog. Neighbors came out in robes and slippers, staring. Someone whispered my name like it was my fault. The fire chief was an old friend of Dad's. He looked at me, then at the burned ditch, and shook his head. "Accelerant," he muttered. "Somebody wanted this gone, evidence or something worse." The county investigators showed up the next morning. They took samples, photos, statements. But I could already tell from their faces, the fire had destroyed almost everything the inspection team found. That afternoon, the HOA president, Mrs. Franklin, stood at the end of my driveway again. Same calm smile, same sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't even look at the blackened ditch behind her. "Mark," she said sweetly, "I'm sorry about the fire. Terrible accident, wasn't it?" I stared at her. "Accident? You people started it." She tilted her head like a teacher correcting a student. "Careful what you accuse us of, dear. I'd hate for you to get another visit from the sheriff." My fists tightened. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You already poisoned the water. You won. Why burn it down?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Winning isn't enough," she said quietly. "It's about control. You should have learned that by now." Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the gravel like the sound of a clock counting down. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. I checked the locks 3 times, sat by the window, and watched the road. Mom's breathing from the bedroom was the only thing keeping me grounded. I thought about Dad, about how he built this house with his own hands, every board nailed with sweat and patience. He used to say, "Land's not just dirt, son. It's memory. It's proof that you were here." And now they wanted to erase that proof. The next morning, a county truck rolled up again, not with inspectors, but with officers. They handed me another document. A new court order. The HOA was now demanding immediate access to restore community infrastructure and remove environmental hazards. In other words, they wanted to dig through my land. They were coming back to take everything. I called Jake. He arrived an hour later with coffee, his tie loose, eyes bloodshot. He'd been reading the filings since dawn. "They're using the fire as leverage," he said. "They're claiming the ditch was contaminated because you tampered with it. They're shifting the blame." I laughed bitterly. "Of course they are." He leaned forward. "You still have those camera feeds from your barn?" I nodded. He grinned. "Then maybe they burned the evidence. But we didn't." We loaded up my laptop and went through the footage frame by frame. At 11:03 p.m., the motion light caught it. 2 figures with gas cans, one clearly wearing the HOA maintenance jacket. Jake froze the image, zoomed in, and whispered, "Gotcha!" He sent the footage straight to the county investigators. Within hours, the sheriff himself was back, not to question me this time, but to ask for the full copy. By sunset, the story was breaking again on local news. New evidence suggests HOA involved in ditch fire, criminal investigation underway. The neighborhood split in half overnight. Some people started putting up "Justice for Walker Family" signs. Others accused me of fabricating evidence. The once perfect lawns of the HOA community were now divided by more than fences. They were divided by fear. That night, while I was locking up the barn, I found something taped to the door. A single white envelope. No name. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me, standing outside by the fire the night it happened. Taken from a distance. And on the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Stop digging, or next time, it's not the ditch that burns." I froze. My hand trembled. I looked around, but the night was empty. Only the sound of crickets and the wind moving through blackened grass. I stood there a long time, staring at the note under the flashlight beam. I wasn't afraid for me anymore. I was afraid for Mom. I went back inside and locked every door. Then I sat by her bed, holding the baseball bat Dad left behind. She stirred, half awake. "Mark," she whispered. "Go back to sleep, Mom," I said softly. "It's just a long night. That's all." But deep down, I knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. They'd burned the ditch. They'd threatened me. And now I had proof that could bury them for good. So I whispered to myself in the dark, "If they want a war, they just got one." If you got that photo, that threat, would you stay and fight back, or would you leave to protect your family? Be honest, what would you do? Backhand index pointing down. After that envelope, I didn't leave the house for 2 days. I watched the road like a hawk. Every car that slowed down made my heart kick a little faster. Mom asked once, "Are you eating?" I lied and said yes. But hiding wasn't winning. If anything, Hiding felt like giving them the map to your fear. So I started moving again, quietly, like a man who knows the ground he walks on. Jake told me to keep the photo safe and to make copies. Distribute it, he said. Get it in the hands of people who can't be intimidated. So I did what he said. I printed a dozen copies and slipped them under doors at the diner, the hardware store, the laundromat. By noon, one of those copies was in Sandra's hands, and she was shaking like a leaf. They threatened your mother, she said. Her voice was small, but her eyes were steady. Not on my watch. Word spread in a way I never expected. People who had been too scared to speak started showing up at our gate. An older man with a cane brought an extra gallon of water. A teenage kid left a stack of flyers that said, "We stand with Walker," and taped them to the lamppost. Power changes people, but so does courage. And once one person speaks, others follow. That same week, an unlikely ally knocked on my door. Deputy Flores, the one who had been polite at first but looked uncomfortable at court. She stepped onto my porch, hands folded, and said, "You saved those lab results for a reason. We found more evidence. The contractor's logs show unusual disposal runs at night." She handed me a copy of a scanned invoice. My name was on it, not as a suspect, but as a whistleblower who'd provided evidence. Her voice lowered. "We can protect you if things go south. But you should know, the board is powerful. They've got friends in high places." I looked at her and felt something odd, relief. Not because the sheriff had our back, but because someone official believed me enough to step into the dark. We planned a sting. Not one that would get me arrested, but one that would make the truth too obvious to ignore. Deputy Flores arranged a controlled surveillance of the contractor's yards. She even let me sit in the car one night, glove box full of coffee and a camera in my lap. At 2 a.m., headlights cut across the gravel again. Two men climbed over a fence carrying black drums. They moved like professionals, fast, quiet, practiced. Flores signaled. The county team moved in. They found barrels of chemical waste hidden beneath tarps. Documents linked to the HOA lined a crate. Chains of invoices, signatures, and a paper trail that smelled of guilt. When the news hit the next day, the HOA's office doors stayed shut. Mrs. Franklin's face on TV looked paler than I'd ever seen her. And for the first time, the neighbors who had stood with her started calling me by name, not with anger, but curiosity, and in some cases, apology. But victory tastes strange. It's sweet and bitter at the same time. Sweet because the truth was finally out. Bitter because this kind of fight changes a man. The county filed charges against the contractor and several HOA board members. The sheriff asked me to testify. Jake said it would be the best thing for the case. But I hesitated. Standing in a courtroom again, under that bright light, with my mother watching, it felt like being on a stage where everyone knew the lines except the truth. Still, we moved forward. The week of testimony, our little house filled with people who wanted to help. Sandra brought casseroles. The teenager from down the road painted a sign and brought it over. Even the diner owner offered to vouch for the times I'd come in late and paid for water jugs. On the stand, I told the story the way it happened, plain and simple. No dramatic flourishes. Just facts, a smell, a test strip, a hospital night, an invoice, a photo of men at 11:03 p.m. When Deputy Flores testified, she explained how the contractor had been using unregulated chemicals and how the HOA had failed to require environmental controls. Her voice was steady, her badge glinted under the courtroom light. But the HOA lawyers fought hard. They called character witnesses who painted me as unstable. They dredged up old petty fines and argued I'd been an agitator long before the poisoning ever came to light. I sat there and let it pass over me like a storm. I thought about Dad, about the long hours he spent molding wood and teaching me how to plant an oak tree so it would grow tall enough to cast a shadow over the next generation. That day on the stand, I thought of that shadow, and how my actions were not about me, but about making sure the next person in our town wouldn't have to drink polluted water because some board member wanted a perfectly trimmed lawn. The judge's gavel finally fell. Several board members were indicted for negligence and criminal disposal of hazardous waste. The contractor was charged with multiple felony counts. It felt like a win, but the win was ugly. Some neighbors turned colder than before. Other people, who had never spoken up, now refused to look at me in the grocery store. I realized something important. Justice doesn't fix everything. That night, a different kind of war began, the quiet one. Anonymous calls to my phone at 3 a.m. Screws loosened in my barn roof. And letters, hateful, filled with curses and threats, slid under our door. The county offered us relocation for safety. A motel for a week, witness protection for a time if we wanted it. Mom looked at me with tired eyes. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought of Dad's hammer on the workbench. I thought of the wildflowers left on my porch. I thought of the younger neighbors who taped up signs and the deputy who risked her job to stand by me. I chose to stay. "Pack a bag," I said. "But we're not leaving the land." We slept with the porch light on and the back door chained. I kept a baseball bat by the bed and a list of every neighbor's number in my pocket. It was paranoia, maybe, but it felt like duty. And then, in the middle of one long night, a soft knock came at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Franklin, eyes red, hair limp, no sunglasses this time. She looked smaller than she had on TV. Her voice broke when she said, "I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to throw the door shut and laugh at the absurdity. Part of me wanted to shove her to the ground and make her feel every bruise she'd given my family. Instead, I stood there and listened. She told me about her own threats, about how the board members had been scared and how some of them had been pressured by developers to keep quiet. She said she'd been wrong, and maybe she'd been weak. I wanted to believe her. But words were cheap currency in this town. Still, that night, when she left a small loaf of banana bread on the porch with a note that read, "For peace." Mom ate a slice the next morning and smiled. Maybe peace had a taste after all. But even with banana bread and indictments, I knew the road ahead would be long. Because you don't unplug a system of greed with a single blow. If someone from the other side came to your door with an apology, would you accept it? Or should forgiveness come only after real change? Tell me, would you take the loaf of banana bread, or burn it and keep fighting? Backhand index pointing down. The day the county shut off the main HOA line. I watched from my porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The same porch where I'd stood so many nights, angry, afraid, planning. Now I just stood still. A crew of county workers opened the valve near the entrance of the subdivision. They took readings, checked meters, then closed the wheel shut. The pipes hissed once, and went quiet. For the first time in years, the HOA didn't control the water. They couldn't fine anyone, couldn't threaten, couldn't poison. I had bought the rights fair and square. The land deed showed my name. And after months of legal brawls, the judge had ruled. The water source belongs to the Walker property, not the HOA. It was poetic. The same wells they used to poison my mom's house now flowed through my hands. When I turned off the supply, I expected chaos. And I got it. Phones rang off the hook. Emails poured in. People begging, threatening, bargaining. Some neighbors tried to reason. We didn't know what they were doing. Others screamed through the fence. "You're worse than them." But I wasn't interested in revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted them to understand what control really feels like. So I made a rule, one single rule. If they wanted water, they had to come in person. No lawyers, no letters, no HOA middlemen. Just people, face to face. The first to show up was Mrs. Reynolds, the woman who used to complain about Mom's flower beds. She looked smaller now, dusty, exhausted. She said, "I didn't know, Walker. I swear. I didn't know what they were doing with the chemicals." I believed her, or maybe I just wanted to. I filled her jugs. Didn't say much. Word spread fast. Some came humbly. Some came angry. But one by one, they all came. For weeks it was like that. Me standing by the pump, filling containers, looking into faces that once voted to ruin us. It was strange. Some people cried. Others said thank you. A few walked away without a word. Mom sat on the porch most days, watching quietly. Her health had gotten better. Color back in her cheeks. She'd smile sometimes and say, "Karma's got a funny sense of humor, huh?" She wasn't wrong. One afternoon, Jake pulled up in his truck. He had a grin that could split a mountain. "News says you turned off an entire neighborhood's water," he laughed. "You know that makes you a legend, right?" I shrugged. "I just closed a valve, Jake." He shook his head. "No, man. You turned the tables." He was right. But legends don't feel like legends when you're standing in the mud with your hands on a rusty handle. Later that week, the sheriff came by. Not in uniform. Just jeans and a ball cap. He looked around, nodded toward the well, and said, "You really did it, huh?" I said, "I didn't do it for fame. I did it so my mom can sleep without a water filter under her pillow." He smiled, one of those small smiles that means more than words, and said, "Well, for what it's worth, the county's not gonna stop you. You're within your rights." That night, I walked the property under the stars. The air smelled clean, like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The frogs were loud near the ditch. And somewhere out there, the HOA's grand clubhouse sat dark and dry. I could have felt proud. But mostly I just felt empty. Justice isn't neat. It doesn't come with applause or bright lights. It just leaves you standing in silence, wondering what to do next. A week later, I got a letter. Not from the HOA, from the city. They wanted to buy the rights. Community partnership, they called it. In exchange, they'd run new pipes, fresh filters, and safe drinking water for everyone. Mom read the letter twice. She looked at me and said, "Maybe that's your chance to end this the right way." I stared at her hands, thin, wrinkled, steady. At her eyes, the same ones that had watched me fight this whole war. And I realized, she was right again. So I met with the city engineer. We shook hands under the same water tower that once served the HOA. The deal was simple. They paid me fair. I kept partial control, enough to make sure no one could twist it again. When the water flowed again, I drove down to the neighborhood just to see. Kids were running through sprinklers. Dogs were barking. Lawns looked alive again. People waved awkwardly when they saw me. Some smiled. Some looked away. I didn't care. Because somewhere deep down, I knew I'd won the only way that mattered. But I also learned something that day. Revenge feels good, for a second. Justice feels better, for a lifetime. That night, I sat on the porch with Mom. The sun dipped low, painting everything gold. She handed me a glass of water and said, "Tastes different now, doesn't it?" I took a sip. It did. It tasted like peace. But I couldn't shake the thought. If they poisoned my mom once, what's stopping them from doing it to someone else, somewhere else? So I made a decision. I called Jake. Told him we were starting something new. A kind of watchdog group, for homeowners tired of corrupt boards and silent rules. We'd share stories, documents, help others fight back legally. He said, "You mean you're taking this nationwide?" I said, "Why not?" Because somewhere out there, another mom was probably turning on her tap and smelling metal. And maybe, just maybe, she'd need someone to tell her she wasn't crazy. That the system could be beaten. Now when I drive past that neighborhood, I don't feel hate anymore. Just memory. And maybe a bit of warning. Because power, when left unchecked, always finds a way to poison something. Sometimes it's water. Sometimes it's trust. But the cure is always the same. Courage. If you were in my place, holding the valve that controls the HOA's entire water supply, would you shut it off to teach them a lesson, or turn it back on for peace? Be honest. What would you do? Droplet. When I look back now, it doesn't feel like a war anymore. More like a story the land itself wanted to tell. Because some stories don't fade. They just sink into the dirt, waiting for rain to bring them back up. The neighborhood still stands. Fresh paint. Smiling faces. New HOA board with new promises. But every time I drive past that wooden sign at the entrance, "Welcome to Willow Creek Estates," I remember how hollow those words used to sound. They built those houses on lies. watered their lawns with silence. But the ground remembers. And so do I. It's been a year since the court ruling. Mom's doing better, stronger than I've seen her in years. She started planting again. Not flowers this time, vegetables. She says she trusts the soil again. And I guess that means something. Sometimes I catch her humming on the porch. Same song she used to sing when I was a kid. A soft tune that used to drift through the house when Dad was still alive. Funny thing is, I can finally hum along without feeling angry. Jake still calls every week. He's been helping other families, people from other towns, who've had run-ins with their HOAs. I joined him on a few calls. We talked to folks from Texas, Florida, even Ohio. Turns out, the same kind of petty power exists everywhere. They fine you for the color of your door, for the sound of your dog, for the flag you hang, for the flowers you plant. But people are waking up now. Our little group, the one we started, has grown into a movement. We call it Freehold Watch. Simple name, simple mission. Help homeowners fight back with truth, not anger. We've helped over a dozen families now. Sometimes we give legal advice. Sometimes we just listen. Because sometimes, that's all someone needs. To be heard. The media called me the man who cut off the HOA's water. I never liked that label. Because the story was never about cutting off water. It was about what people do when they're thirsty for control. When you see what power does to neighbors, you realize how fragile community really is. And yet, I still believe in people. Even after everything. Last month, I got a letter, handwritten, shaky, from someone I never thought I'd hear from again. Mrs. Franklin. She wrote, "I still see the well when I close my eyes. I see your mother on that stretcher. I can't undo what we did, but I've left the HOA board for good. I'm volunteering with the county's clean water program now. Maybe redemption doesn't erase sin, but it waters something new." I read that letter 3 times. Mom read it once, then folded it gently and tucked it under the sugar jar. She said, "That woman found her conscience late, but at least she found it." I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe someday. One evening, near sunset, I walked down to the well. The same one that started it all. The pump handle still groaned like an old hinge. But the water that came out was clear, cold, alive. I splashed some on my face. Felt the sting of the chill. And suddenly, I remembered the first time I found that metallic taste in Mom's kitchen faucet. That same smell of iron. That same helpless anger. But now there was none of that. Just the sound of crickets. And the low hum of peace. I sat by the fence until the light started to fade. Then I saw 2 kids, maybe 8 or 9, riding bikes down the gravel road. They waved when they saw me. And for a second, I saw myself at their age. No HO, no fines. Just wind, dust, and laughter. That's the world I want to leave behind. Because somewhere between revenge and forgiveness, there's a quiet middle ground. That's where real victory lives. Later that week, I attended a county meeting, this time not as a defendant, not as a rebel, just as a speaker. They'd asked me to talk about property rights and community ethics. Strange, right? A year ago, they wanted me gone. Now, they wanted me on stage. I looked out at the crowd. Some faces from my old neighborhood. Some new ones. Even a few city officials taking notes. And I said this. When people talk about home, they think of walls, lawns, and fences. But home isn't what you build, it's what you protect. And sometimes, the only way to protect it is to fight the very rules that claim to keep it safe. The room went quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the whole room joined in. It wasn't applause for me. It was applause for everyone who's ever stood up against small-town tyranny disguised as community care. When I got home that night, Mom was waiting on the porch. There were 2 glasses of lemonade. The air smelled like rain. She said, "You finally sound like your father." I smiled. "Guess it took a poisoned well to find my voice," I said. We sat there, listening to the frogs, the hum of the crickets, the distant sound of sprinklers down the road. And for once, There was nothing left to fight. Just peace. But peace doesn't mean the end of the story. It just means the storm's past. The land will grow again. The people will rebuild. And maybe, somewhere, another man will face the same battle. And when he does, maybe he'll remember this one. Because water carries memory. And so do we. When I closed the gate that night, I looked up at the sky. The stars shimmered, quiet, endless. I whispered, "This one's for you, Dad. We finally made it right." Then I turned off the porch light. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear. So tell me, if you were me, would you have stopped after justice, or taken it further, made them feel what it's like to lose control? Where does justice end, and revenge begin? Thought balloon.